Right, let's get one thing straight. The Ford Motor Company isn't just some car manufacturer, it's a global institution, a colossal beast of industry that has shaped the very world we live in. You can't drive down a street, anywhere from the desolate plains of the Australian outback to the clogged arteries of London, without seeing that famous blue oval badge. It's on transit vans delivering your Amazon parcels, on Focuses doing the school run, and if you're lucky, on a thumping V8 Mustang tearing up the tarmac. For more than a century, Ford hasn't just been building cars, it's been building the modern world, one chassis at a time. It's a story of raw ambition, mechanical genius, and the occasional spectacular cock-up. Think about it, the very idea of the weekend, the 5-day work week, the notion that an ordinary bloke could afford to own a car and escape his dreary life for a bit. That's all Ford. It's a company that has put more people on the road than any other, democratizing freedom in a way politicians can only dream of. Before the factories, before the billions, before the legend, there was just a man, Henry Ford. He wasn't some silver spoon aristocrat who stumbled into business. He was a farmer's son from Michigan, born in 1863, with an insatiable curiosity for how things worked. While other boys were mucking out barns, young Henry was taking apart his father's pocket watch just to see if he could put it back together again. He had a natural, God-given talent for mechanics, an intuitive feel for the dance of cogs and gears. He left the farm as a teenager to become an apprentice machinist in Detroit, the beating heart of American industry. In 1896, in a small shed behind his house, he built his first car, the quadricycle, a spindly, four-wheeled contraption that looked like a bath chair strapped to a lawnmower engine. It was crude, but it worked. His first 2 attempts at starting a car company were, to put it mildly, a complete shambles. The Detroit Automobile Company and the Henry Ford Company both imploded because his investors were impatient. They wanted to build expensive cars for rich people to turn a quick profit, but Henry had a different vision. Finally, on June 16, 1903, with $28,000 in cash from a dozen investors, including the Dodge brothers, who would later become his rivals, the Ford Motor Company was born. In the early days, Ford, like every other car maker, was basically throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what stuck. They built a range of models with confusing names like the Model A, the Model K, and the Model S. The real breakthrough, the eureka moment, the thunderclap of genius that would echo through history, arrived on October 1st, 1908. It was called the Model T. It was designed from the ground up to be tough, simple to drive, and easy to repair with a basic set of tools. It had a high ground clearance to handle the truly abysmal roads of rural America, which were little more than muddy tracks at the time. Affectionately nicknamed the Tin Lizzie, the Model T became more than a machine. It became a member of the family. It took farmers to market, doctors to patients, and families on their first ever holidays. It ploughed fields, powered sawmills, and served as a mobile generator. At first it came in a few colors, but in 1914 Ford famously declared that customers could have it in any color so long as it is black. This wasn't an aesthetic choice, it was a masterstroke of efficiency. Black paint dried the fastest, which meant he could build them faster. When it launched, a Model T cost $825, still a hefty sum, but within reach for the middle class. But Henry wasn't satisfied. As his production methods became more and more efficient, the price plummeted. By the mid-1920s, you could buy a brand new Model T for under $300. Building millions of Model Ts required more than just a good design. It required a revolution in manufacturing. In the early days, cars were built by craftsmen. A team of skilled workers would huddle around a single chassis, fetching parts and fitting them one by one. It was slow, expensive, and about as efficient as trying to knit fog. Henry Ford, with his relentless obsession with speed and simplicity, looked at this chaotic process and knew there had to be a better way. He'd seen the continuous flow process in flour mills and meatpacking plants, where carcasses moved along on hooks. A light bulb went on. What if instead of the workers moving to the car moved to the workers? On December 1st, 1913, at his Highland Park plant in Michigan, Ford fired up the world's first moving assembly line for automobile production. It was an act of pure, unadulterated genius. A bare chassis was dragged along by a rope and pulley system, stopping at a series of workstations where each worker performed one single, simple task: bolting on a wheel, fitting a fender, tightening a specific set of nuts. The work was repetitive, mind-numbing, and soul-crushingly boring. But my word, was it effective. Before the line, it took over 12 hours to assemble a Model T. After the line was perfected, it took just 93 minutes. It was industrial alchemy. The economic impact was staggering. Production exploded. In 1912, Ford built about 82,000 cars. By 1916, that number was over 734,000. To combat the crushing monotony of the work and the high turnover of staff, Ford did something completely unheard of in 1914. He more than doubled the daily wage to a staggering $5 a day and cut the workday from 9 hours to 8. It was a masterstroke. Not only did it stabilize his workforce, but it also turned his own employees into customers. This $5 day was revolutionary. Other industrialists called him a socialist, a traitor to his class. But Ford knew exactly what he was doing. He was creating a new middle class, a consumer class with both the time and the money to enjoy the very products they were building. After selling over 15 million Model Ts, even Henry Ford had to admit the old Tin Lizzie was getting a bit long in the tooth. By the late 1920s, rivals like Chevrolet were offering cars with more style, more comfort, and more cylinders. The public wanted more than just basic transportation. So in 1927, Ford shut down its entire production for 6 months to retool for a new car. The result was the 1928 Model A much more sophisticated machine with a conventional 3-speed gearbox, 4-wheel brakes, and a bit of actual design flair. But the real game changer came in 1932 with the introduction of the Ford V8. The company's ambition wasn't confined to America's borders. Henry Ford had a global vision from the very beginning. The first international Ford factory opened in Canada in 1904, followed by one in Manchester, England in 1911. Soon, Ford plants were springing up all over the world, from Germany and France to Australia and Argentina. It built self-contained industrial complexes like the colossal River Rouge plant in Dearborn, which had its own steel mill, glass factory and power station. It was a city dedicated to building cars, a monument to industrial might. When World War II broke out, Ford, like all American industry, pivoted to the war effort. It became a key part of the arsenal of democracy. Its factories stopped making cars for civilians and started churning out an astonishing amount of military hardware. The most famous contribution was the Willow Run plant, a purpose-built factory that used assembly line techniques to produce B-24 Liberator bombers at the incredible rate of 1 per hour. After the war, a newly prosperous America was desperate for new cars, and Ford was ready. Control of the company passed from the aging Henry Ford to his grandson, Henry Ford II, who brought in a team of sharp young executives, the whiz kids, to modernize the business. The post-war era was a golden age for Ford. By the early 1960s, the world was changing. A new generation of young people, the baby boomers, were coming of age. They had money in their pockets and, well, a rebellious spirit. They didn't want their parents' big, sensible saloon cars. They wanted something different, something exciting, stylish and affordable. A sharp executive at Ford named Lee Iacocca saw this cultural shift and had an idea. He envisioned a new kind of car, a compact, sporty machine with a long bonnet, a short boot, and a whole catalogue of options that would allow buyers to personalize it. The Ford Mustang was unveiled at the New York World's Fair on April 17, 1964, and the result was nothing short of pandemonium. It was an instant sensation, a cultural phenomenon. Ford had expected to sell 100,000 in the first year. They sold that many in the first 3 months. On the first day alone, they took 22,000 orders. It perfectly captured the youthful, optimistic spirit of the 1960s. It was more than a car, it was a statement. It created an entirely new class of vehicle, the pony car. Soon, every other American manufacturer was scrambling to create their own version, like the Chevrolet Camaro and the Dodge Challenger. The Mustang's success propelled Ford to the forefront of pop culture. It starred in movies like Steve McQueen's iconic chase scene in Bullitt. It was sung about by pop stars and became the ultimate symbol of American cool. This cultural impact was amplified by the burgeoning muscle car craze. While the base Mustang was a stylish cruiser, you could option it with a massive V8 engine turning it into a fire-breathing monster. Ford fed this appetite for performance with legendary models like the Shelby GT 350 and GT 500, created in partnership with racing legend Carroll Shelby. This focus on performance wasn't just for the street. Ford took it to the track. In one of the greatest rivalries in motorsport history, Henry Ford II, after a failed attempt to buy Ferrari, vowed to beat them at their own game, the 24 Hours of Le Mans. He poured millions into developing the Ford GT40, a purpose-built racing machine. After some initial failures, the GT40 achieved a stunning 1-2-3 finish at Le Mans in 1966, humiliating Ferrari on their home turf. They went on to win the next 3 years in a row. It was a titanic achievement that cemented Ford's reputation for high-performance engineering and gave them global bragging rights. The party of the 1960s came to a screeching halt in the 1970s. The decade was a perfect storm of problems for Ford and the entire American auto industry. The 1973 OPEC oil embargo sent fuel prices skyrocketing, and suddenly the gas-guzzling V8 muscle cars that had been so popular looked like dinosaurs. Consumers wanted smaller, more fuel-efficient cars, and Japanese manufacturers like Toyota and Honda were more than happy to provide them. Ford was caught completely flat-footed. Its showrooms were full of enormous land yachts like the LTD and Torino, which were about as economical as setting fire to a wallet full of cash. The company scrambled to respond, rushing smaller cars to market. Some, like the European-designed Ford Fiesta, were actually quite good, others not so much. This era gave us the Ford Pinto, a subcompact car that became infamous for a critical design flaw. Its fuel tank was located behind the rear axle, making it susceptible to rupturing and catching fire in a rear-end collision. The resulting scandal and lawsuits became a public relations nightmare, tarnishing Ford's reputation for safety and quality. It was a dark chapter, a symbol of how the mighty Detroit giants had lost their way, prioritizing cost-cutting over sound engineering. The challenges continued into the 1980s. Stifling government regulations on emissions and safety combined with relentless competition from Japan pushed Ford to the brink. Quality was down, morale was low, and the product line was a mess of uninspired, boxy designs. It was a period of deep introspection for the company. They knew they had to change or they would die. The turning point came in the mid-1980s under the leadership of a new team who championed a new philosophy: quality is job one. They invested heavily in new designs and manufacturing processes, determined to beat the Japanese at their own game. The first fruit of this new approach was the 1986 Ford Taurus. It was a revelation. With its radical aerodynamic jelly bean styling, it looked like nothing else on the road. It was a huge gamble, but it paid off spectacularly. The Taurus was a massive hit with critics and consumers, becoming the best-selling car in America and signaling that Ford was back in the game. This was followed by another game-changing success, the 1991 Ford Explorer. It essentially created the modern consumer SUV market, combining the ruggedness of a truck with the comfort of a family car. These two vehicles saved the company and set the stage for a period of renewed prosperity. As the 21st century dawned, a new challenge emerged, one that threatened to be even more disruptive than the oil crises of the 70s, the end of the internal combustion engine itself. Concerns about climate change, tightening emissions regulations, and the rise of a new swaggering competitor in the form of Tesla forced Ford to confront a difficult truth. The V8 engine, the technology that had defined the company for nearly a century, was living on borrowed time. The future, whether they liked it or not, was electric. Ford, a company built on gasoline and horsepower, had to learn to think in terms of kilowatts and battery cells. Ford's initial forays into electrification were, shall we say, hesitant. They dabbled with hybrids like the Escape hybrid and produced some compliance-level electric cars with limited range and even more limited appeal. For a while, it seemed like the old giant was once again asleep at the wheel, content to let others lead the charge, but behind the scenes, a seismic shift was taking place. The company committed billions of dollars to a full-scale electric transformation, realizing that this wasn't just a niche market, but the future of the entire industry. They decided that if they were going to do electric, they were going to do it the Ford way, by electrifying their icons. The first shot across the bow was the Mustang Mach-E. Calling an electric family SUV a Mustang was heresy to some, a stroke of marketing genius to others. But it worked. The Mach-E was stylish, fast, and packed with technology. It proved that an electric car could be desirable and exciting, not just a sensible, eco-friendly appliance. This was followed by an even bolder move, the F-150 Lightning. Taking America's best-selling vehicle for over 4 decades, the rugged, dependable F-150 pickup truck, and making it fully electric was a monumental gamble. It was a direct challenge to the heartland of the American auto market. Today, on July 31st, 2025, Ford is in the midst of this radical reinvention. It's splitting its business into 2 divisions, Ford Blue for its traditional combustion engine vehicles and Ford Model E for its electric future. It's building massive new battery plants called Blue Oval Cities and investing heavily in software and connected car technology. The goal is not just to build electric cars, but to create a whole ecosystem of services around them, from charging networks to over-the-air software updates. It's a high-stakes bet on a completely new kind of automobile and a new kind of customer. So here we are. Over 120 years after a stubborn farm boy decided there had to be a better way to get around than being dragged by a horse, the Ford Motor Company is still here. Still innovating, still fighting, still trying to shape the future. Its history is a microcosm of the 20th century itself. A story of incredible ambition, world-changing innovation, devastating wars, cultural revolutions, and near-death experiences. It's a company that has put the world on wheels, invented the modern factory, created the middle class, and given us some of the most iconic and beloved machines ever made. From the humble Model T to the tire-shredding Shelby GT 500 and the silent, potent F-150 Lightning, the Blue Oval has been a constant presence in our lives. The legacy of Henry Ford and his company is not just in the cars themselves, but in the ideas they represent. The idea that technology should serve everyone, not just the rich. The idea that efficiency and mass production can create prosperity. The idea that personal mobility is a form of freedom. Of course, it hasn't all been perfect. The assembly line created mind-numbing work. The automobile created urban sprawl and pollution. And the company has made its fair share of terrible cars. But you cannot deny its monumental impact. It is, without a shadow of a doubt, one of the most important companies in the history of the world. Looking forward, the challenges are immense. The transition to electric power is the biggest upheaval the industry has ever faced. New competitors are emerging from Silicon Valley and China, unburdened by the legacy of a century of building petrol-powered cars. Can this old giant learn new tricks? Can it pivot fast enough to survive and thrive in this new electric age? The smart money says you shouldn't bet against it. This is a company that has stared into the abyss before and has always found a way to roar back, often with something brilliant. The spirit of Henry Ford, that restless, tinkering, never-satisfied spirit, is still alive in the factories and design studios of Dearborn. As Ford navigates this new world of batteries and software, it carries with it the legacy of more than a century of putting people in motion and empowering their dreams. In the end, the story of Ford is a story of relentless forward momentum. As the great man himself once said, if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got. And Ford has never been a company content with standing still.